All right. So, can you all see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. All right. Cool. Well, working. All right. So first of all, thank you so much for having me talk. I know it was a bit rough getting started here, but hopefully the rest of this will be pretty smooth. I think it will be. My talk is a brave new editing world, PowerShell and Visual Studio Code. My name is Tyler. This is me on top of the Space Needle when we can go outside. And I'm a software engineer at Microsoft, and I work on the PowerShell team. And I mostly work on the PowerShell extension for Visual Studio Code, along with a bunch of other random projects as well. So this talk that I'm giving today is actually adapted from a talk that I did recently that was only for internal teams at Microsoft. We did this thing called we called it First Party Conference, where it was basically an all-day event, an all-day like conference on Teams that just given to Microsoft employees, and we not only did members of our team talk at this conference, but also we pulled some of our partner teams. We had someone from Azure Functions come and talk, someone from .NET, and the idea here is that we were just we represent ourselves at all the different conferences that happen within the PowerShell community, but we wanted to focus and actually give a talk, give a conference format to our internal teams as well. And so since this particular topic is very useful both internally and externally, this talk is adapted from that one. So anyway, that's the context as to where this is coming from, which is why I've got some official looking slides with Microsoft's logo on the bottom and PowerShell's logo on the bottom. But yeah, so the agenda for today, oh yeah, one other thing is that if you want, you can follow me on Twitter there at Tyler Leonhardt, just my full name. And that's also my my handle on Twitch. I mentioned briefly that I do some streaming, and I do that all on Twitch as well. I'll stream what I do for my job and stream other miscellaneous PowerShell related things. And I do that on Twitch. So the URL is just twitch.tv/Tyler Leonhardt. And you can check that out if you'd like. If someone could please mute their mic, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, so now the agenda. So I've got a few points I want to cover. The first thing is, what is Visual Studio Code, for those of you who are watching that aren't familiar with it. Then we'll also talk about some PowerShell ISE compatibility stuff, how VS Code can help with writing scripts and stuff like that. So those are the three main points, main takeaways that I'd like for you all to kind of take away from this talk. So, it's a relatively beginner-focused talk, but hopefully for some, you'll pick up a tip or two if you are familiar with this product. So I first should start out with answering the first question: what is Visual Studio Code? So Visual Studio Code, VS Code for short, is a text editor by Microsoft, and what a fantastic name for a product, because this is not Visual Studio, it's Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio, you might have heard before, is the kind of heavyweight has some negative connotations to it, but I'm just going to say heavyweight IDE experience that Microsoft has had for years and years, all typically focused around writing C# or other .NET languages. But that's not this product. Visual Studio Code is completely different. It was built completely from the ground up and really shares no code with Visual Studio proper. And it's made to be a lot more lightweight than Visual Studio proper. And the idea here is that it's 100% free, it's 100% open source, and it runs everywhere. It runs on any platform, so Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So you can get that at code.visualstudio.com, or it's also available on just about any package manager you can think of. So go ahead and get it that way if you'd like as well. And so what's really awesome though about this product is that it's extensible. And that's kind of what you're seeing here in this screenshot is a glimpse at the extension marketplace and a bunch of different extensions that you can install that make the editing experience in these languages better. And so naturally, just as there is a Python extension, C, C++ extension, there is a PowerShell extension. But not only is there a PowerShell extension, but there's two PowerShell extensions. There's PowerShell and PowerShell Preview. And all you have to do to get one of these extensions is to go into that extension marketplace, which is the 4 little building blocks in Visual Studio Code, search for PowerShell, and you'll see them showing up there. So the difference here is that PowerShell Preview is just a preview of what's to come in the PowerShell extension. The name kind of says it all. It doesn't require a preview version of PowerShell. It's purely just things that are in the works in the PowerShell extension that haven't quite made it to the main product yet. We started this second extension about a year ago when we introduced PS readline support in the integrated console that you'll see, and we've been using it more recently as a staging environment for new features and bug fixes to go for people to try out. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the preview. It doesn't differ much from the stable extension, but I understand if previews are scary and you want to go stable. So at least you have the option there. So I do also want to point out, I mentioned this a bit, is that the PowerShell extension supports, not only does the PowerShell extension supports the newest version of PowerShell, PowerShell 7, but it also supports Windows PowerShell 5.1 and PowerShell Core 6.2 as well. So that is like our support range: Windows PowerShell 5.1, PowerShell Core 6.2, and PowerShell 7. So if this PowerShell extension supports Windows PowerShell 5.1, then you might be asking, well, what about the ISE? Well, the reality is the ISE it's not going anywhere. It's going to stay in Windows for probably the end of time, as things happen to stay in Windows till the end of time. But it is in maintenance mode. We're not making any changes to it. It's not going to support PowerShell 7. It doesn't support PowerShell 7 today. And because of basic limitations in the ISE, for example, it can only run on Windows, we don't think it's worth our time investing in newer features for it, especially since our product is cross-platform. So what we are saying is that Visual Studio Code and the PowerShell extension is the future and present of PowerShell editing. If you're still on 5.1, feel free to use the ISE as much as you want. It's like I said, it's not going anywhere, but we're investing all of our time in the PowerShell extension to make it the future of PowerShell editing. With that said, perhaps some of you have maybe tried Visual Studio Code in the past and we're a bit scared off by some of the capabilities that it can do. It can really do a lot. There is a lot to this product. And oftentimes it can seem kind of kind of daunting about the capabilities that it has. And so one of the things that we added semi-recently, actually it was added by a community member, was a more simple experience in VS Code and the PowerShell extension. And we call it ISE mode. And the idea here is what this will do is it's geared towards giving you folks and people you know, like a bridge from the ISE to taking advantage of Visual Studio Code and the PowerShell extensions features. And it looks a little something like this. And I like to show this video with my VS Code settings JSON open, because you'll see this feature adding a bunch of settings to your user settings in order to give this experience that it gives. So here's what Visual Studio Code looks like normally. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the command palette, which is Control-Shift-P, and I'm going to type enable ISE mode. And right then and there, you see just a ton of settings are added to the settings.json. And this does a whole bunch of things. One, it shows the preview of the command explorer there. It makes it so that new files that you open in Visual Studio Code default to being PowerShell files. It hides all the extra junk that you saw on the side there. And if you were to run with debugging, it doesn't pop open any of the debug pane. And some other things that just kind of like make the experience a little simpler to kind of wrap your head around. Because it is a much more complicated complicated application than the ISE. And we acknowledge that, but we think it has a lot of value in those features. So this is one of many attempts to bridge the gap between the ISE and the extension. And so for those of you and for people you know who've kind of struggled with this transition, or people who are wary to try Visual Studio Code because they'll say that, I'm not a developer, I can't use that, or things of that nature, show them this, and we think that it'll help for those users. So that's the ISE mode. And also you might have noticed that the color scheme is also applied that kind of resembles the ISE. It's kind of funny seeing them side by side. The resemblances, like if you glance, they do look quite
similar.
Yeah.
Can you show us again what are the settings that are added to a settings JSON file? Briefly.
I probably can just start here. Let's see. Okay. So here are the ones that are set. So activity bar, that's the bar that was originally over here. So that's set to false, to not show. The debug pane never opens when you hit F5 or you hit or if you hit the play button over here. Tab completion is on, so when you see the Intellisense, you can hit tab and cycle through it. Focus console on execute means that you can select a line, hit F8, and then the cursor won't jump down to the console. It'll stay right where it is. I mentioned default language is set to PowerShell and the color theme is set to the ISE. Those are the ones that are added today. And we're definitely interested in adding more if they make sense. So those are the ones, at least for now.
Thank you.
Yeah. And this was the button I was talking about. So naturally, the rest, or this portion of the talk is me kind of like just going through a bunch of features in the extension. And so I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. because some of them are pretty self-explanatory. So number one is IntelliSense. I already mentioned this in the ISE mode, but it's just this idea of when I'm typing something, I get this little box here that tells me what my options are. So we still show that along with some extra details on the right there on syntax and also descriptions. If you like scroll down in this pane, it'll give you some descriptions as well. So IntelliSense is there as anybody would expect. What else? There we go. There are a ton of snippets that ship in box. So for example here, if I wanted to create a commandlet, but I'm tired of writing the same boilerplate code over and over and over again. Snippets, which are a concept of the ISE that also exist in VS Code, are here to help for that. So I type CMDL. Oops, forgot to hit play here. There we go. Hit enter, and I get this nice block of code already. And once I hit tab, I can jump right into the parameter block there, type param, and then there's a snippet for creating a parameter there as well. And I can tab through that as well if I'd like. I mean, it took me what, like 10 keystrokes or something, and I had all of this code already ready for me. So there are a ton of snippets that ship within the product, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, but there is a command palette option. If you go to Control-Shift-P and search for, I think it's insert snippet, it'll show you a list of snippets that are available for you. But yeah, there's a ton of them that ship within the box, but also it's totally extensible. So if you want to go and create your own snippets, you can. It's just a little bit of JSON, and it's quite simple. I think there's even like some tooling, some like website that lets you create a snippet from just some like pasted code. But yeah, snippets are super powerful, especially if you share them amongst your team for like whatever generic purpose you have. So snippets, another fan favorite. What the? Okay. Oh, it just started over. All right. The other thing that is a pretty critical feature is references and code lens. And what that looks like is, so here I've got this function called getCatFact. And as soon as I finish typing that reference down on line 5, this little thing called a code lens appears above the function that says I have one reference. And if I click on that, it shows a little dialog, points me to where the reference of this function is, and I can easily navigate towards that. Naturally, this is a very simple example, but it does scale pretty well. It even can scale to another file. So in this case, I have this loop.ps1 here, and it imports this module, import module, test module, psm1, and then calls, and then has a commandlet from that module. So if we look into that, if I hit F12 on that test module, it'll actually jump over to the psm1 to where it's defined. And then from there, I can click on that one reference and jump back to that reference in the other file. So by using this, you can safely jump back and forth between your code, especially as your code becomes, as your scripts become larger and larger and larger. You need to be able to navigate them in a sane way, and this is one way to do that. So that's code lens. I'm noticing that some stuff is happening in the chat. So I'm just checking that really quick. Okay, cool. Oh, I guess I could mute people. Tip for next time. All right, so the other thing that is a very famous feature in the ISE is the ability to run a particular snippet of code. And normally what you would do is you would select a piece of code and hit F8, and that would run it in the console below. And that's exactly what you can do in the PowerShell extension as well. So here I hit F8 on this line 5, and we see that it's not recognized. And that's because the function is not actually available in the state. So I'll go ahead and select all this code, hit F8 again, and now my call to get catfact doesn't work. I'm not sure why the text is gray there. It looks better on Windows, this theme. But yeah, and so then you see I select get catfact once again, just that line, run it, and now it works because that function is now loaded within the PowerShell session. So F8 is absolutely like critical experience for PowerShell users. And now this is kind of an older video, but now there are some buttons up here in the top right that that allow you to run code without having to use your keyboard. You can just click on them. So many different ways to run code. Another really fun feature of the PowerShell extension is this feature called Open Editor File. And in the ISE, there's a command called psedit. And what it would do is it would allow you to run in the console below psedit and then the path to a file. And then that file would then open up in the editor pane above. And so we have that same experience here in the PowerShell extension. It's called Open Editor File and has an alias psedit. So psedit still just works. And so this is what it looks like. So down in the console below, you see that I'm catting my profile here. And I've got a bunch of stuff in there, right? So let me go ahead and open that profile in VS Code, and I could do that by just doing Open Editor File. And ooh, we've been upgraded. Fantastic. Open Editor File, $profile, and so then it'll open that file right in the editor above. A really nice way to fully take advantage of the PowerShell integrated console down below. There's also a new editor file that will create a new file in your editor. So I encourage you to also give that a try. If you just type new editor file, it'll actually open an untitled file in VS Code, which is kind of neat. And then you could potentially give it some, you could pipe some like output that you want to put in your file. So as an example, if you just like pipe get process into new editor file, that should just work. So yeah, open editor file and new editor file, psedit, critical features from, well, psedit was a critical feature of the ISE that is also available in the PowerShell extension. But we took it a step further. Okay, so another huge feature of the PowerShell extension is debugging. And if you're not too familiar with the concept of debugging, that's okay. Debugging is this idea of kind of taking your script and stopping at certain points along the way, just to kind of check in to see is my script running correctly. I'm going to show a demo of that. So honestly, like this could be a whole session of itself, a whole talk. And in fact, it was a whole talk. I did a whole talk on debugging at PSConf EU last year. And I believe a link to that is available at the end of my slides. But let me go ahead and show you just some of the things that you could do with debugging. So the first thing is really nice about debugging is that you can set breakpoints. So I've got a PS1 here. It's very simple. All it does is call out to the catfax API, using invoke rest method. Very critical, important code this is. And so what I can do is I can go ahead and like place my cursor over on this blank part of my instance of VS Code here. And I can hit the dot there, and then that'll place a breakpoint here. So now when I hit F5, or if I hit this play button over here, it's going to actually stop before it runs anything else and stop me right there. And so you see I have a debug prompt here, and over on the left here, there's a ton of stuff that I could do with the debugger. It's got all my variables that are set in my process, and I can actually like hover over things to see like what the values are. So like I could see hello is hello everyone. I could even do that down here if I wanted to. Hello everyone. I could even, let's see, I could find it in the variables here. Here it is. And change this to like online fam. And then when I can hit this step over button, and so that'll step over to the next line. But then we see down in the console below here, it says, hello online fam, how are you? Because I was able to change the state as it was running. And so this is a fantastic way to test out you know, your larger scripts. And so the rest of this demo is going over some of the other breakpoints that are available in the PowerShell extension. So the first one that I like to show off is if you just like right click on this, there are three options here. There's add a breakpoint, there's add a conditional breakpoint, and add a log point. So let's look at what conditional breakpoint is. So you can actually put an expression here, or if I hit this, I could do hit count or a log message. So for hit count, it says break when hit count condition is met. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this hit count to like 4. And what this means is that, and hit enter here. So the 4th time that this line of code is hit, that's when it'll break in the debugger. So let me hit play here. And we see in the output, because we're just doing a very simple loop here, it goes 1, 2, 3, and then it breaks. And that's because this is set to 4. So that's really handy if you've got like a ridiculous loop, but you only care about what happens when it reaches like something towards the end. So that's like a really, really nice way of doing that. The other thing that you can do is set what's called a log point. And what that means is if I just right click and I do add log point, this is just a message to log when a breakpoint is hit. So it's not going to actually break. It's just going to say something in the console. So I'm going to just say like, hello world here. And you can tell that it's a log point because it's a diamond there instead of a circle. And then the other thing that you can do is you can set a conditional breakpoint. And what you do with that is you have expressions selected here. And then at this point, I can basically do like any sort of evaluation here. So I'll do when num of facts is, I don't know, greater than 5. No, let's do less than 10. Then we will break there. And I'm also going to place one more breakpoint here. And you'll see how this is all going to come together. So I've got a ton of breakpoints in my file. So I'm going to hit play. The next breakpoint that gets hit is here, but that's because getCatFact is being called. It's a log point, so we see hello world showing up in the console. So that's cool. And so you know what? We know number of facts is set to 100, but let's go ahead and just change that, shall we? Let's do number of facts 4. And so now that number of facts is set to 4, if we hit play, it actually hits that conditional breakpoint that we had set. And then if we play it, then we get our facts. And then the debugger stops. So this was an attempt to show you just how powerful debugging can be. I know it's a lot at first, and you definitely don't need to use all of these types of breakpoints initially. Just start with the very simple single line, like boom breakpoint, and you're golden. But then once you're more familiar with using a debugger, then you can take the next step and mess around with these other types of breakpoints. There's also one thing I kind of skipped over briefly, is that there's an ability to set function breakpoints. So let me clear out all of these other ones. Remove, remove, and remove. I don't have any breakpoints in this file. However, let me go ahead and actually let me set one here, and I'll hit F5. And so I'm going to set a breakpoint down here in the breakpoints section to break on for each object. So the second I see a for each object in my script, I want the debugger to break. And sure enough, it does that. This one's really handy because if there's a particular function that you're running and you know that it has some sort of problems, you could say, all right, break when this function gets run. And then you don't have to bother trying to step into a bunch of things. It's pretty handy. So that's all the different breakpoint types. There's a lot of them, but they all have their use. And here's 100 cat facts for those of you that wanted it. I'm sure you did. Just clear that. So that's debugging, a very brief and somewhat complicated example of debugging. There's some other stuff that we added recently, like untitled debugging in PowerShell 7. So if you're using PowerShell 7, we change this to a PowerShell file. So this is a PowerShell file, an untitled PowerShell file. You can also change the language by tapping the language down here, which shows you that. So let me go ahead and fill this with just stuff. And we'll just do something like this for now. So this file does not exist on disk. It's purely an in VS Code file. But something that we lit up in PowerShell 7 was actually the ability to debug this, despite it not actually existing on the file system, which is something that can only work in PowerShell 7. So this is great if you want this experience of, I don't even want to save a file. I just want I want a file that's empty that I can throw a bunch of stuff in, and I want to debug it as well, and I don't even want it to exist in the file system. So that's something that we lit up specifically for PowerShell 7. So something to try out. All right, so I think that's enough on debugging for now. Like I said, there's so much more that I could talk about with respects to debugging, and it looks like Alexander did paste the link to my debugging session from PSConf EU 2019. So definitely give that a try. or give that a watch. I hope you enjoy it. So, all right, let's go back to the slides for a sec. Don't worry, I'll be back in VS Code. So naturally, if I've not managed to convince you to make the switch yet, you might be asking why. Why do I care? Why do I bother switching to VS Code? And the reality is, it's because of this fantastic quote from a real person, which was, after switching to VS Code, I've noticed a drastic increase in the quality of my scripts and modules. And I swear, real people have told me this, or some variation of it. And the main reason this is said is because of a few key integrations that we have in the PowerShell extension. So next section of this talk is all about integrations. So the number one integration that everyone knows and loves when dealing with the VS Code extension is the integration with PS Script Analyzer. PS Script Analyzer is PowerShell's linter, if you're familiar with what a linter is. And if you're not, what it does is it provides formatting for your scripts and also diagnostics of your scripts. And diagnostics here are, well, you'll see what they look like in a sec. So I've got a demo of this. This was the one I was trying to finagle right before the talk. So we'll see how this works. So I've got this really ugly looking script here. And it's actually kind of funny because I literally pasted this out of my PowerPoint into VS Code. And it's horribly formatted. Like, everything is on the same line. And it's just so ugly. I don't like looking at it at all, frankly. And you notice there's a few things right off the bat. For starters, there's a bunch of these squiggles under these things. Not quite sure what that is. Well, those are the diagnostics that I was talking about before. So let me hover over this one. And it's under IPMO here. And the diagnostic says, IPMO is an alias of import module. Aliases can introduce problems and make scripts harder to maintain. Please consider changing aliases to its full content. So what I can do here is I could just click on Quick Fix here. And it says right here, I can replace IPMO with import module. So I'll just do that. And it makes that change for me. And some of the diagnostics will have things like that to make some quick changes. Others won't. But something that is really cool about this integration is formatting. So I'm going to open up the command palette here. So that's Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P if you're on a Mac. And I'm going to search for format. And if I do format document, it's going to take my script and fix a bunch of the indentation. It also expanded all the aliases inside of the script, among other things like that. It looks like there's still some trailing white space here, but that's easily dealt with that way. But yeah, so just like that, I mean, like, the difference from what I had to what I have now is just like so much nicer, right? It's leagues ahead. So I wanted to go over a few things that you might be like wondering about. So let's go ahead and go through some of these other squiggles here. So the top one here is script definition uses write host. Avoid using route host because it might not work in all hosts. So prior to PowerShell 5, it can't be suppressed. So let's say I wanted to target, PowerShell v4, v3 with the script. So I probably want to get rid of this and change it to like write output or something else. And that'll get rid of that squiggle. So let me go ahead and do that for these other ones as well. So I'm going to use this cool key binding to select multiple lines at the same time here. Or what is it? It's control. Oops. Well, here, I'll do it this way. Cool. So now I have multiple cursors here. So let me do right output. Boop. Like that. Cool. So what is this one saying? It's saying, so this is an interesting one. First of all, it uses WMI, which for PowerShell v3 and above, you should really use the sim commandlets because they're better, frankly. And you can do that with sim instance. What's that? I think I accidentally hit a breakpoint or hit the wrong button here. Hang on, let me clear my breakpoints. Okay. All right, we're back. Get sim instance. And this is cool that it'll tell you that the parameter does not exist. Gosh, I had the, what is this? Is it class name? I forget the exact syntax for this. I know that this is wrong, but I believe I could get rid of this, something like that. Yeah, nice. So my script doesn't have any issues in it, which is cool. But what if I wanted to take advantage of some newer features of PowerShell and include maybe the for each parallel feature that shipped in PowerShell 7? Something like for each parallel. But I get this warning, and it says the parameter parallel is not available for command for each parallel by default in PowerShell version 5.1. And this is nice because, you know, if I want to run this script in 5.1 or v3 or whatever, I get these really nice things that say it's not available in 5.1. And I'll show you how this is configured to give you these types of warnings. But I just want to show you the power of Script Analyzer here. So there's also ways to like suppress these types of warnings that you might be seeing. So I have got this function down here. And what it'll do is basically check, am I in PowerShell Core, PowerShell 7? I guess this check should really check the version, but let's say we only care about 7 and 5.1. So are we in PowerShell Core, PowerShell 7? In which case, let's use parallel for that. Otherwise, let's just do the old behavior, the slow behavior. And you see that I suppress this use compatible commands here for this function. So if I were to get rid of this suppression, then I see that diagnostic again. Now I'll say that this suppression is a little it's not ideal. It could be better, and in time the suppression mechanics of Script Analyzer will improve. But this is kind of like what we have so far. So let me go ahead and use this. Instead of this, I'll just like throw this right here. The input object paths will go here like that. So now I've got this script that leverages this that leverages for each parallel on PowerShell 7 if it's run in 7, or it runs just fine in PowerShell 5.1. And I think one of the cool takeaways is this is that you saw that like I could tell if something was going to be available in that other runtime. And I'm on a Mac, like I'm not even on 5.1. I don't have 5.1 on my machine, but I could still author a script that probably works on 5.1. right here from VS Code on my Mac. And that's kind of a key takeaway with what's capable in PS Script Analyzer. And so if we just like take a peek at my my Script Analyzer settings file here, we could see how this is done. It's done using two really cool rules: PS use compatible commands and PS use compatible syntaxes. And I'm not going to dive into the deep end of these commands. They're documented on Script Analyzer's repo, which is in a link at the end of my slides. But basically what these profiles are saying is I want to support 7 and I want to support 5.1. And then I could also say, look, I want to support 7 on Ubuntu. And then let me flip over to my script, make a small change to trigger this, and we'll see something like this happening, where it says get some instances not available on PowerShell 7 on platform Ubuntu 18.04. So there's a lot of power here, especially if you're writing scripts that are run across multiple environments. But the main sell here is that, look, you can use PowerShell 7. It is the best PowerShell for authoring PowerShell. You can use PowerShell 7 on your machine today with VS Code and still write scripts that target 5.1, 3, 4, whatever. And you can do that using some of these Script Analyzer rules. So that's the main takeaway of this. So that's just a little tip of the iceberg of Script Analyzer. I did show you that I had a special Script Analyzer settings configuration file. You don't need this by default. There are rules that are applied for like basic things like expanding the aliases, or when you use when you have a variable that you haven't used anywhere, other things like that. So you don't have to go and craft a settings file if you just want some basic validation of your scripts. The idea here is that the extension provides a nice experience out of the box without any configuration, but then has this extra configuration that you can leverage. Okay, that was a lot on Script Analyzer. Geez, it's a cool thing. People also use it in continuous integration. So running Script Analyzer on your scripts to make sure that your Script Analyzer rules pass. It's really cool. Definitely take a look at the docs for it. Okay, the other awesome integration is Pester. So this is the time I would normally say show of hands who uses Pester, but you know, we're online, so it's harder to do. But Pester is PowerShell's testing framework, right? And it allows you to write tests for your scripts and modules. And so we have a nice little integration with Pester. And it looks something like this. So here we have a project.tests.ps1, a Pester script file, right? And we can see the code lens there for run test and debug tests. And I can actually click on those to do, well, exactly what you would expect. Let me click run tests, and it'll run the Pester tests down below. I'll go over to this one, and I'll place a breakpoint, hit debug tests, and then, sure enough, it hits a breakpoint. And I'm able to take advantage of all the debugging stuff right out of the box for me. And then it runs the rest of my tests when I hit play. No configuration needed. This is available to you out of the box. There is something that was added recently by Jakob, one of the maintainers of Pester, for Pester 5. So Pester 5 is around the corner for those of you who didn't know. And you should definitely talk to him about maybe giving a talk at this meetup. But Pester 5 is the latest and greatest Pester. I think it's on like RC 4 right now, so it's almost ready to be released. But what's really awesome about Pester 5 is that it gives you the ability to specify a specific it or context block that you want to run. And so we can take advantage of that in the PowerShell extension. And so now each of those little it blocks that you see on the screen will have a run test, debug test over them as well. And you can do that today in the extension. There's a setting called Use Legacy Code Lens. So if you're already on Pester 5, you want to use Pester 5, you can take advantage of that code lens today. Eventually, that will be the default behavior as Pester 5 becomes more of the go-to Pester. But for now, we offer this experience. So definitely take a look at Pester 5. It looks awesome. And I think we're lighting up some more scenarios that are going to be fun in the extension. All right. So that's the last of my original talk. And just to go over what we've learned here, the ISE is a maintenance mode. Feel free to use it if you still want to. But VS Code is the way. This is the way. It's the future. Thanks to the PowerShell extension. Leverage its features to write cleaner and more maintainable scripts and modules. The ISE mode is there for a simpler experience if I scared you with this presentation. So those are kind of the main takeaways. But there's just one more thing I wanted to cover today. And if you do enough GitHub snooping, you'll be able to see what I've been kind of experimenting with recently. But I figured since I was talking at this meetup, I might as well use it as an opportunity to also talk about the latest and greatest extension feature that I've been working on. I'm just going to pause here for a little bit. Okay. So the latest and greatest feature in the extension coming soon is notebook mode. Now, for those of you who do stoop around on GitHub, specifically at what VS Code has been up to, you'll know that VS Code has been working on a notebook experience inside of VS Code. And it's not necessarily tied to Jupyter. And don't worry, I'll give context on what the heck I'm talking about. It's not necessarily tied to Jupyter, but it gives extension authors like myself the ability to take any arbitrary data, any arbitrary script or file or whatever, and provide a notebook experience on top of that. And so that's what I have been kind of working on in my spare time. And I'm going to show it off here. So let me bring over my build here. Now, for those of you who don't know what notebooks are this concept of combining markdown documentation, just some documentation, and also executable code. And so historically, notebooks were based on, or are part of this thing called Jupyter. Jupyter being the runtime for notebooks. And what you could do is you could mix, they were backed behind this JSON file. And then inside of this JSON file, you would see markdown text and also like PowerShell script or whatever language. And you could actually like execute those lines of code if you opened up this JSON file in like a Jupyter editor kind of thing. So VS Code has been offering this experience for people to provide the UI look and feel of notebooks, but with any file behind the scenes. And so that's what this is. So right now you're just looking at a PS1, a normal PS1 here. You see that there's comments and some code in it. So the thing that I'm thinking about adding is a new button here that says show notebook mode. And so when you click on it, it's going to take that PS1 and render it as if it were a notebook like this. Let me bring up my console here. And so what you're seeing is this very interesting formatted PS1 where I can actually like hit the button here for play on each of these cells. And it'll actually run in the integrated console below. And so each of these are backed behind, I mean, the whole thing that you're seeing here is backed behind a PS1 script or PS1 file, right? So I can actually like edit each of these and say like, so here's some markdown, right? So let me add some like, I'm bold. Actually, I think that's italicized. So there we go. I'm bold. And then I will click out of that. And so now we have some bold text. And if I hit save to that and we look at the original file, we'll see that it's got the bold text right in there, right in the comment. And so let me go ahead and open up notebook mode again here, and we'll see what else we can do. So like all the normal language features work. We've got Intellisense here. Intellisense works. References work pretty well. I'm working on it at the moment. There's some small issues, but working through it. What else is available? You can create new markdown if you wanted to. This is a thing. And then some new code, get child item. Oh yeah, you could see that diagnostics still work as well. I can run that down here, save the file, and then if I go back and look at the actual file, you know, it's still there. This was the cell that the code cell that I just added. This was the markdown cell that I just added. But yeah, so this is the, you know, coming soon. Like there's still some things that aren't quite right. Like I don't know what happened there, but this is what I'm envisioning as notebook mode for the PowerShell extension. And this button, which I don't think works right now, but will let you hop back to the actual script file, which is nice. So yeah, that is a glimpse of notebook mode. And what I'm envisioning here is you have a PS1, you're opening it in VS Code as raw text. You want to look at it in notebook mode. Then you can take what's in notebook mode and export it to play nicely in Jupyter, in .NET Interactive, which is another thing that I don't have to talk about right now, but another cool thing we're working on. But yeah, so this is it. This is the big thing that I've been working on, and I think a lot of people are. I hope a lot of people are gonna enjoy it. So I wonder why this got all messed up. Anyway, I'll have to debug that later. All right. I think that's pretty much it. I think I started at what, like 4:30 it, and I'm at 5:15 here. I guess the last thing I could show you is what else have I been working on? I haven't been working on this necessarily, but if you ever run into an issue with the PowerShell extension, you can open the command palette, Control-Shift-P, and type bug. That's not a good one. Upload bug. Yeah. And that'll actually like open up the repo for the PowerShell extension and fill in a bunch of details for us that we need. And then all you have to do is attach the logs as well. And then you're good to go. So please do open issues if you see them. Gosh, I think that's it. Trying to think if there's anything else. I had a nice slide here for slides if Tyler talks too fast. So I just talked about the bug thing. I'm going to skip the Azure Functions thing, but there was someone who gave a talk on Azure Functions today at BridgeConf, so be sure to check that out. And the remote development extension is pretty fun. If you set up SSH on your remote machines, then you could do something like this that just works magically. So I've got my my work desktop sitting in my office in building 41 at Microsoft. And so if I just like open this folder, it will connect here in a sec. And under the hood, it's connecting over SSH. And I'm sure it's slow because I'm sharing my screen, but once it establishes the first connection, the rest of them are pretty easy. The rest of them go pretty quickly. There we go. Cool. So now, notice this path. It's a Windows path. That's because I'm on Windows now. Looks and feels like I'm on my Mac, but I'm on Windows, and I'm running an old version of PowerShell Preview. But yes, this is all provided by the remote SSH extension. It's really easy to set up, frankly. Oh yeah, this one. I've been using the nightly. I'm not sure if it's in the stable one, but surely either one will do. It's pretty nice, I have to admit. I use it for working on the PowerShell extension all the time. But give remote development a try and stop using RDP, please. Yeah, and great point, Mike. Something I didn't really cover because it's not necessarily a PowerShell specific feature, but the let me close out of this one and go to, do I have a Git repository here? No. Get rid of all this. But I think VS Code's source control integration is so fantastic. Like they make it, they really make it like so easy to use. Like I often find myself using the source control integration in VS Code over using the actual Git CLI tool. So you know, if you interact with any sort of Git repos, or you know, if you're curious about doing that, leveraging what VS Code has to offer is a great way to do that. Yeah, it's nice. What can I say? Okay. I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm gonna wrap up here with a bunch of links. So we have Script Analyzer, both where to get the code, the rule documentation, VS Code, where to get it, where to get the PowerShell extension, where to get the PowerShell Preview extension, and then the code behind the PowerShell extension. And then some important docs. This first one is about using Script Analyzer to check PowerShell version compatibility. So I had been using the use compatible types, or rather use compatible commands Script Analyzer rule. So that comes from this blog post. And then there's the main docs page on using VS Code, and then how to replicate the ISE experience in VS Code. This doc is basically ISE mode in doc format, if you were curious. So that is the gist of my talk, and that's a good point, Phil. The double hop is tricky, definitely. I don't have an answer for you on that at the moment, but I should find an answer for that. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. I hope you learned something, maybe just once, just one thing. But I guess, like, what, I'll hang here for maybe another 10 or so minutes and take some questions. I'll do like hard stop at 5:30 so I can go have some dinner, which is what's the time difference? 3 hours. So yeah, let me bring up the, how should I do this? Should I stop sharing, or yeah, so I don't know how you want me to do this, James, but frankly, if any of you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
I have a question, kind of like the notebook mode. Is that, but I think one of the, at least what I understand, I'm not a Jupyter expert at this point, but the idea that, hey, it all stays within, and it's like a record of it. So your notebook mode doesn't do any of that stuff. It just like converts it into the mode. Is that, or is it, I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the big benefits of the notebook files in the Jupyter ecosystem is that you can see the output right there, both in the JSON file that is behind all the magic, and it is an active record. My thinking with notebook mode is that it's kind of it's not like fully Jupyter experience, and for that I will push the PowerShell Jupyter kernel, which is what we're working on with .NET Interactive. This kind of is in the middle for people who want kind of the notebook experience, but maybe can't convert everything to the IPYNB JSON files, or just want to look at their script in something a little bit more structured than raw text. So yeah, that's, at least initially, that's kind of what I'm thinking of.
I think it makes it a lot easier to, inject your own markdown into the file. I really like the idea of sticking markdown into it and then just here it is. And so kind of like you showed, hey, this is bold, here's a header,
Right.
This is all, here's the block of code you're on, boom, boom, boom. And
Exactly.
then almost even like then output, I think there's like Pandoc, a couple of them that will output, PDFs from it and stuff like that using that
Exactly.
markdown. So that'd
Yeah.
be cool. That'd be a good feature to add, or at least this is my feature request.
I think if I had to guess, is that once this notebook UI starts to pop up more and more in VS Code extensions, and it's still really early days for the notebook stuff that VS Code exposes. Like, it's only in insiders, and I still have found a few bugs with it. But once that becomes more like accepted, I think you'll see a bunch of tooling around any extension that offers some kind of notebook mode to it, so that you could take that, export it to a PDF, or export it to an actual Jupyter notebook or something like that, So early days, but that's a glimpse of the future. Anybody else? If not, you can always tweet at me or join me on a stream or something.
So Tyler, the Azure Data Studio supports PowerShell notebooks, but I think they use a different kernel than the .NET Interactive, right?
Yeah.
Are there any plans that the both Visual Studio Code and Azure Data Studio will use the same kernel?
So the idea, Azure Data Studio will support the .NET Interactive kernel soon. There were some issues in the first integration, but they're actively working on that. It's going to happen very, very soon. As for it showing up in VS Code, that's going to take a little bit more time because there's with the exception of like the Python extension, there's not really a Jupyter extension for VS Code. These notebook UIs, like someone would need to go and make a new extension for Jupyter that takes advantage of this notebook UI stuff that VS Code provides. So that will happen eventually, but it's Azure Data Studio will have the support for it first, and I don't have a timeline on like when that stuff will land because I'm not on either of those teams that are working on that. Yeah.
Okay, and as we discussed, the Jupyter notebooks right now don't support some of the interactive commands in PowerShell. Your notebook mode will probably not have that limitation, right?
Today, all I'm doing is running what's in the code block in the integrated console below. So I don't foresee there being an issue with interactive scenarios. But I do want to also say that the .NET Interactive kernel has come a long way with some of the interactive experiences in PowerShell. So things like get credential and read host, all that stuff work in .NET Interactive now. So it might be worth giving that another try as well. Any plans for PowerShell support in Visual Studio IntelliCode plugin? Great question. What we, so like, I think PowerShell support in IntelliCode is like #2 most requested feature or something like that. Basically, the gist with that is their team is has been asking our team to work with them, and it just there's only so many people on our team, and we haven't had the chance to sit down and work with them on it. So, are there plans? Yes, we've talked to those folks before, but we don't have time at this very moment. So, but in the future, I want to support it. I might go and chat with them and see if I can do it in my exploration time. Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, it's 5:30. I guess I'll go ahead and, oh yeah, don't forget to stop the recording. Yes. Thank you all so much for coming. Definitely let me know on Twitter or in a GitHub issue if you're having trouble with the extension. Also, be sure to check out, I'm sure they're going to have them, but the recordings from today's BridgeConf that happened, it's going to be great, I'm sure. I didn't get the chance to see all the sessions, but from the ones I saw, they were awesome. And yeah, thanks again. I hope this was great. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you all next time, I guess.